Welcome back to News Talk 640 WFNC. We are talking real estate with Wendy Harris of Team Harris Real Estate and Chet Mann of Guild Mortgage. So Chet, you're in the mortgage industry, which means you've been been the front row of the I don't know what to call it. There's several four-letter words that aren't appropriate for radio that I'm not going to use, but let's just say you've been in the front row of the show of what the federal government is doing to fix our economy. And basically, they've been playing around with interest rates. So let's talk a little bit about what the feds have been doing to America and why it may be working and what they're still not getting right.
You bet, Wendy. And thank you again for having me on the show. Big fan of yours. So this is great.
Oh, and by the way, before he starts, if anyone wants to talk to Chet at any time about a mortgage or anything having to do with real estate or these interest rates, what's your phone number, Chet?
Yeah, sure. It's 919-777-0114. And you can leave a message there or talk to one of my associates. If I'm on this show and I can't get to you, I'll call you back.
That's right. And he will. He's great returning.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So now let's talk about it. What's the Fed been doing?
Yeah, so here's the thing. We know what caused this problem. It's called COVID. And the government stimulated a ton of money. They started printing money. You can debate whether it was good or bad or indifferent, but the sure fact of the matter, Wendy, is they printed a lot of money. And when you have too much money chasing too few goods, one thing happens, and it happens every single time in our history. It's inflation. And so, that's exactly what's happened. That's also why I think we can eventually get this thing back under control. We know what created it. We pretty much can try to fix it. But when the Federal Reserve said, when Jerome Powell said, we're going to unfortunately inflict pain to fix this, what he meant was who's really going to get the infliction of pain was the regional banks. And the regional banks are where a lot of companies like Guild Mortgage and others get some of their investment loan programs. For example, construction perm programs typically originate from a regional bank. And so the regional banks like Silicon Valley was one of the first to go out, because here's the problem. You can't be at a 2% interest rate that the banks are borrowing money at 0 to 2%. And in the scope of 1 year, go to 8 or 9%. Or 5.5 to 6% is what they did. They raised their prime rate. The banks cannot make that up on volume. You can't triple your business fast enough to absorb those new costs where you booked everything originally at 2%, and now all of a sudden things are due at 6 and 7%. You can't pass that on to your customer. And so what we had was 11 federal fund rate increases in like a year. So all those folks that got those 3.5% mortgages during the COVID stimulated period, which was just like the Wild West in real estate, people were buying $50,000 over list and as is, $20,000 in due deal, just non-refundable, take it or leave it those days. Now we're looking at, we went almost 8% a few weeks ago. And, but that's been the byproduct of what the Fed's doing. The Fed has said, we are going to get in. Our target is get inflation down to 2%. And when we do, we'll start cutting rates. Well, we're at about 3.3. That last percent is always the hardest to get. The good news is it's starting to improve. We're starting to see a gradual little bit of decline, but that's why we are where we are. And the banks are the ones taking it on the chin.
Yeah. So the banks are taking it on the chin in order to fix it.
Yeah.
And yet we still, inflation is slowing down, but prices are still high. So I think a lot of people, the reality is the prices don't really go backwards.
Right.
And so
they come down a lot slower than they go up.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you've got core inflation and you've got non-core inflation. So the core inflation is what they're watching, but the thing that hurts regular people is, the things that are not in that core, which is gas and food. You go to the grocery store, you're going to pay, you feel it. You go out to eat, gosh, you really feel it. And then, of course, gas is starting to come down. It's probably because it's an election year. They're going to do what they can to do that. But when you take that out, we have made a huge stride. I mean, we've gone from 9% in durable goods now to about 3%. So we're on our way. We've made a lot.
On our way.
Thank God we're not in the 70s because they didn't know how to do it. And we had like 10, 12, 14% interest rates for years.
That's right. We remember my dad was in the business when they hit 17%.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We know how
Yeah.
to fix that now. At least we have more tools than we did back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's a worry or a concern we're going to have to deal with here.
Yeah. So fixing the economy. So they seem to be on track for that. But now let's dial it down to what that means for the housing industry, right? Because that's where we specialize, whether it's, well, commercial. Let's talk about real estate overall, because we've got lots of different dynamics that are happening, right?
Right.
Despite all of this, despite all the prices going up, we still haven't necessarily, equating real estate to farming. We haven't really increased the number of chickens that are producing more eggs in the real estate industry. So we have basically, if you look around the country, we've got chickens that are the same chickens that are laying a few more eggs than what they were. But we still have a shortage of eggs on the shelf.
We use a lot more eggs, that's for sure.
We can use a lot more eggs. And so of course we're talking the housing shortage.
Yeah.
It is still there. It is still apparent. And the interesting thing about the dynamics is because of the interest rates, houses are sitting on the real estate industry has slowed down in some degree, right? There's fewer people buying homes because a lot of those first-time home buyers are out of the market. People who don't have to move are out of the market, but people are still buying homes. It hasn't stopped. And when interest rates dropped a little bit, was it last week or the
last couple of weeks? Yeah,
a couple of weeks ago, we saw a lot of buyers wanting to lock in rates and suddenly buy at that time. But we still have prices of homes are still going up. And if homes are priced right and they're in good condition, we still have multiple offers coming in and sometimes prices over list price and that type of thing. So we've still got this pressure on real estate pushing values higher, even though they're going up slower than they were, they're still going up. So while we're fixing kind of like the financial side of the economy, what we don't seem to be doing is fixing the supply and demand side of real estate. Now, you're an interesting person to speak to about this because you are a part of one of the few banks that does still loan money to builders.
Yep.
And a lot of banks aren't doing that. In fact, speaking with builders over the last few years, a lot of them are self-funding because the money is so hard to come by. And so instead of building 40 houses at a time, they're doing 5.
True.
Which I'm glad they're doing 5 or maybe stretching to 10, but we need to get them back to the 40.
No doubt.
But if builders are able to self-fund at a smaller rate, they're going to do it because they can't pay 8% interest rates or even higher on commercial loans to build. There's no point in building. They're not making any money. Right?
That's true.
So what do you think from that banking lending perspective? What are you seeing in markets like, because you're in Sanford, so you work down here, but you also work up in that like Raleigh market, which is that really high end. So talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on that construction side.
Yeah, sure. And I am fortunate to be right in the middle between Fayetteville and Raleigh. So I do work Triangle area and the Sandhills area and Fort Liberty area. You're exactly right. I mean, builders have had to slow it down. One of the things too that people don't understand is that the labor market is part of their problem too. Interestingly enough, though, I've talked to many builders in the Fayetteville area and in the Raleigh area, and they're all telling me they're going to raise prices next year. They're still not stabilized. Their labor market for sure is not stabilized. They don't know where their next crew comes from sometimes and how much they're going to have to pay them. And the materials have come way down, but they're still not stable. They still can't predict what they're going to pay for their building supplies. So it's interesting that home prices are going to go up next year too. One of the real saviors of this economy, because you're right, we're still seeing houses go overpriced, over list, competitive if they're priced right or in good shape, is that we have such a job creation market. I mean, we still have like 80 people a day moving to the Raleigh Triangle area. One of the top 3 in the country, I think, for people moving here. So people need a job and they need a house. And that's why this recession, slowdown, high inflation period, whatever you want to call it, has not been as dramatic or severe as it could be, because it's not a job loss slowdown. We know what's caused it. So I think what's got to happen is rates have got to drop, or builders are going to have to remodel or retool how they do it, reorganize, build smaller houses at less price, because we've sold homes at 14%, but they weren't McMansions. Mm-hmm. They weren't 4 bedrooms with 2-car garages and all the bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. They may end up having to scale back what they build to meet people's budgets. But Wendy, the good news is, and this is a hard thing for people, because there are a lot of people, rightfully so, that don't think this is ever going to get better. There's a lot of people that think we're going to be in the 70s stagnation period, and we're going to be at 8 or 9, 10% forever. Mm-mm. And it's not really true. In fact, I have these slides and presentations, that I can show, but every period of high inflation or recession since 1945 in the history of the United States has resulted in rates. The Fed raises rates right before a recession. By the way, we're probably going to proclaim a recession in January. That's not a bad thing. It needs to go ahead and happen. And every time we've done that, that has signaled the beginning of the drop in rates. And a big indicator just went off like a few weeks ago. When you hit a cycle low unemployment rate, when everybody's working, that usually signals a recession, because it's almost in that same parallel of too much money chasing too few goods. Now you got too many people working. So suddenly you have to see some job loss. And we've had a 0.5% increase in unemployment in the last month. And 100% of the time since recorded history, when we've hit a cycle low in unemployment and then go up a 0.5%, we have gone into a recession. 100% of the time. So the good news with that is this will be fairly mild, soft landing recession, we believe. But every time since 1945, we've probably had 9 or 10 recessions. Every time we have a significant drop in interest rates, followed by a even more significant drop in mortgage rates, followed by a housing boom, which is also followed by a rise in median sales prices. So you don't wait.
The only difference in that is we're not having any drop in sales prices. Like, that's the one thing that's just not going to follow
really hasn't gone
every
down.
Other trend.
It's because we're blessed to live in an area of North Carolina where there are more jobs and people looking to buy than there are inventory. So that's just economics 101. Prices will not drop because of that.
That's right. And so, because our demand keeps going up. So yes. Your really great observations and historical perspective there. But speaking specifically about North Carolina, so all that's going to happen nationally, and yet North Carolina will remain in a growth rate, in an increase of job rates. And so we may find North Carolina bucking, but benefiting from those national trends.
I agree. Our highs may not be as high, but our lows are not as low here in North Carolina. We don't hurt as bad during these bad times as other places do. But you're right. I mean, I think we're going to come out ahead. We're going to fare very well because of our thriving economy and our job market here in our business-friendly state, really. But I do believe that history has indicated, and there's no reason to believe that history is not going to repeat itself right now. We know what caused this inflation. We feel like we know how to fix it. It's painful. But I think you will see sometime in the latter part of 24 and definitely, hopefully in 2025, a major change in the market, in the housing market. Doesn't mean all markets will recover, but we pretty much as an industry believe the housing market's going to have a big year in 2025.
Yeah.
And so the thing I would tell the listeners is, if you're pre-approved and can't afford a home, waiting and putting it off to buy another year is probably going to end up costing you more, because that same house that you're looking at with Team Harris today is going to, if it's even on the market, and it won't be, is going to be, 5 to 10% more next year. So if it's a $400,000 house, $300,000 house, you're going to pay, $15,000 to $30,000 more. How would that make you feel? Regardless of interest rates.
Yep.
So we have ways to lower your rate for that period of time until the markets change, and then we'll be able to typically refinance most people into a much easier payment. But to
Yeah,
wait,
you've got a few programs for that. You do, which is
yeah,
interesting.
lots of them. We're doing it with builders. Temporary rate buy downs are fantastic, and a lot of these builders are paying it.
Mhm.
But customers get it confused. What's the difference between a temporary rate buy down and a permanent buy down?
Mhm.
The permanent, you can't, you put your money in, your rate stays low, but you're paying for that. But a temporary rate buy down, you can buy a really low rate for a period of a couple, maybe even 3 years to buy you time for the interest rates to drop and then refi. But you can do that with somebody else's money, typically the seller or the builder.
Yeah.
And you talk about going into a 5% rate today on that $500,000 house. That's a whole lot easier to afford than a 7.5 or a 7.
Sure.
And I
Sure.
think that's where we're going to head in 2025. But the problem is when rates get down in those fives, Wendy, there'll be 5 or 6 buyers for every single home that you're trying to compete with. And we'll be back in that buying frenzy.
That's exactly right. And prices will be going up. So again, we're going to be where we were a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Just because of the shift in the cost.
What will happen, in my opinion, is the average person who wants to sell their existing home, they will start to list their homes where they're not doing it now because they can't get out of their low rate. When rates get into fives, they're going to go, you know what? We can make this change now. We can sell this house and go to the assisted living, or we can sell this house and buy one for our growing family in the 5% range. They're not really willing to do it in the 7s. So right now, the new inventory is the builder. But in 2024 and 5, you're probably going to see your neighbor list their house. And that's going to be the difference in the market. But then you wait and rates drop. Everybody's going to buy that.
Everyone's going to buy it. All right, we've got to go to our last commercial break, but when we come back, we're gonna throw another little possible kink into this plan for people to look forward in the next few months to what may or may not be happening. So we are talking real estate right here on Team Harris. We'll be back after the break with Wendy Harris and Chet Mann of Guild Mortgage, our guest today.